motivation to go on a diet or to train or to get into any kind of physical activity for pretty much all of my clients is this idea that they have control over their body, and that if they get a body that is smaller, leaner, they will be happy. And unfortunately, that is never the case in my experience.
Hello and welcome to Wise Nutrition Podcast, the podcast that brings you conversations about nutritional, health, mindset and training topics. I'm your host, a certified nutrition coach, Daniel Weiss. And for everybody who is listening, today we are addressing, I think, a very important topic nowadays, which is body image issues. And I think that's very important to address because we live in a culture that places a huge focus on how we look, how we perceive ourselves, and how other people perceive us. And that has a huge impact on our life and our happiness, right? And I see that in my practice and from my own experience that we can get easily sidetracked from what is really healthy, and we want to improve, maybe at first our health when we come into improving our relationship with food, and we want to be healthy, but we get sidetracked and then we fall to these kind of restrictive behaviors, and that has a negative impact on our body image. We maybe start purging, striving for unrealistic goals regarding our bodies, and it just makes us depressed, dysfunctional beings. And we, at first we have these nice, great goals, and then we fall for these bad behaviors, and we end up in a place that is even worse than when we started. So I'm happy to have you here today because you are an expert when it comes to body image issues, and you have a vast experience in therapy. So hello and welcome again, Simone.
Thank you. Well, I wouldn't say I was an expert, but I would say it's definitely my specialism. And I think the two are different because there's always stuff you can learn. But yeah, definitely I specialize in body image for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So what can you tell us about your experience or about your specialty?
So I kind of came to this as just a layperson, really. I got into training when I was really young. Probably I started training when I was like a teenager, not seriously, just a few light weights. And then I had an on-off relationship with training right through my 20s. Mm-hmm. So I always loved kind of that environment. I love the idea of, kind of doing something for your body and your mind. And it made me feel really good. And then I had twins in my mid-20s, and I just found that I lost a sense of, there's all that stuff that goes on when you become a parent. I think men probably go through it too, but maybe slightly differently. But your body becomes an unfamiliar terrain, and you lose familiarity with it. And so I returned to training after I had my twins, but there was a different focus for me. It wasn't necessarily about how it was making me feel. It was about kind of getting back the body that I had before. And at that time, I actually was working as a sports therapist and as a yoga teacher, and I was a PT as well. So I was kind of in this professional environment where people were coming to me for training advice, for help with all manner of health and fitness. And my body became my brand, and so it became really important to me that I should have a body that reflected the image of health and fitness, which is the thin ideal. It is that kind of very toned, very lean physique. And it became really hard for me to sustain. And so I ended up going down the rabbit hole of eating less and less to sustain this body. And I was working and I was training and I got really sick. And I'd already done a psychology degree, so I had some grasp of, the fact that my behavior was disordered and that maybe there was some issues there. But it wasn't really until I discovered intuitive eating, I suppose, and I kind of started looking into it in a more academic sense. So I guess I came back to those principles, those kind of psychological principles of body image, of food and eating, that I realized that I really needed to address this. And I ended up kind of fixing myself, I suppose. I did have some help. I had some help from my GP, but not really a great deal. And I guess that kind of led me to look more into nutrition and more scientifically. So I was interested from a lived experience perspective, but also I became really interested in metabolism. Mm-hmm. And so I did a master's, a professional master's in nutrition and behavior. I also became an intuitive eating counselor. And I did some counselling training many years ago. And I was already kind of working in that field anyway. And now I'm a trainee psychologist. I'm a trainee counselling psychologist. So I have a practice where I work kind of offering online therapy for people who are looking for guidance within like kind of body image and food and eating. So some of my clients have full-blown eating disorders. Many of them are just kind of in this weird space of like not having a diagnosed eating disorder, but having long-term body image issues and disordered eating patterns, and feeling really confused about why they are obsessed with food but can't seem to ever get to this kind of elixir of a happy place, this final place where this destination, you can say, right, I'm here, I'm fixed. They never ever get there, and they're just frustrated. And so my research for my master's was weight stigma. And I don't know what my research for my PhD is going to be yet, but certainly I am fully invested in the idea of looking more into kind of behavioral nutrition. So that's me.
Right. And I really like this connection between nutrition and cognition, or basically the mental side of eating, because I think these two things are married together and we should not divorce them. So
no.
Yeah. So would you actually say that people who have this idea that, okay, I will have an idea of my ideal body, usually they have a picture in mind of how they should look, right? We develop some kind of picture, and maybe it's from social media, maybe it is from comparing ourselves to other people. So would you say that often these people who even diet to their ideal body, are they happy afterwards?
Yeah, that's a big question. I don't know. I think for most, I mean, I can only really speak for the clients that I've had.
Right.
And so I guess it's different for everybody, but I see patterns, and I guess one really common pattern is kind of stumbling into dieting. So not necessarily having a body in mind, but just having a sense from probably quite a young age. And this is really particular to women, because I have to say, like 99% of my clients are female. But just from a really young age, just kind of having a sense that you're bigger than everybody else. And that might be factual. That might be that you were a bigger kid, or you were bigger than your siblings, or it might be more of an embodied sense of being bigger, but you're not, when you look back at photos, you weren't. So it's very much like a perceived embodiment of I take up too much space. And that might even be like it might not even be to do with the body. It might be to do with like being too visible, right? So this is the beginning point, and then stumbling into dieting, not necessarily intentionally, but just making these small decisions to eat less, move more. And what tends to happen for my clients is that they don't find that there is any benefit, or they do, but either way, they feel that they have to carry on dieting regardless, because once you've made that decision to eat less, you're consciously then engaged in the practice of choosing with your mind, with your thoughts, I am going to eat this food and I'm going to eat this much of it. And so to backtrack from that, to go back to the mindset of I'm going to decide what I need to eat based on palate, based on energy levels, based on hunger, and I'm going to choose what to eat based on a whole myriad of cues rather than just your external thoughts. It's quite difficult to backtrack to that space once you've come away from it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, go on.
So what tends to happen then is they just go into on-off dieting relationships for a really long time, and it could be like half of somebody's life is just taken up by, when I'm on a diet, I feel like I'm in control. When I'm off a diet, I feel like I'm out of control. And so they begin to connect dieting with feeling good about themselves, with being, with having discipline, with also mediating emotion as well, like mediating some difficult emotions, which might be to do with body image. So they kind of, associate dieting with being in a good place, and being off a diet as being out of control, going back to bad habits, really negative body image, and kind of feeling really chaotic. But whether or not that comes from a real sense of the body actually changing, it's really difficult to say, because a lot of people that I work with, their body weight has been the same for a really, really long time. So there hasn't actually been any change in body weight, but their relationship with their body is what changes, the way that they feel about their body. So really it's like body image is not necessarily about the way your body actually looks or the size of your body. Body image is more about the relationship that you have with your body and your perceived thoughts and feelings that you have about your body and what it does.
Right. So basically, the body image can change over time. That's what you are saying?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think definitely the motivation to go on a diet or to train or to get into any kind of physical activity for pretty much all of my clients is this idea that they have control over their body, and that if they get a body that is smaller, leaner, they will be happy. And unfortunately, that is never the case in my experience.
Yes, I would agree with that. That's basically, if I can add to that statement, that if somebody has this kind of motivation and perception that when they get into the dieting, that once I have this kind of body that I will be happy, once I have six-pack or certain percent of body fat I will be happy, it's never the case. It's always like you should be happy before you achieve that. And well, I think that would be the right approach in my from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree, because I think if you associate your happiness and well-being with having a certain body fat percentage, or a certain dress size
or self-worth.
Yeah, with yourself, you're never going to kind of get there, because there is more to us as human beings. There is more value that we can bring to our relationships, to our jobs, to our professional practice, and just to be a kind person, should be enough. But I think for many people, they don't feel enough. They don't feel like valuable. They don't feel attractive. Mm-hmm. They don't feel like they can take up space because they don't have a particular body. And unfortunately, convincing somebody that actually that's more of a mindset than a reality tied to your body,
right?
That's quite a hard sell.
Right. And I think one of the most important things now that you mentioned is like fear of not being enough, because we have these two basic fears, right? That we are not going to be loved and that we are not enough. So
yeah.
And yeah. I think nowadays, or in this society, maybe my also view is a little bit skewed, because I'm what I'm served from the social media, what I'm interested in, and what I see most often is like diets and nutrition and fitness. So I look at these things from maybe a little bit different perspective than an average person, but I think that nowadays, like, there is a huge push from the fitness industry, or maybe like healthy eating, and everybody wants to be healthier, happier, faster, smarter, stronger.
Yeah, right.
So yes, there is this like chase from our side to get those things, and getting back to the original point, like we might feel like we are not enough because we constantly compare ourselves to somebody else.
Yeah, and I think there's a phrase in yoga from like Vedanta philosophy, and it's just be where you are. Mm-hmm. And I think what that speaks to is the idea that chasing a goal, and I don't think having goals is a bad thing by any stretch of the imagination. I think having a goal is a great idea. But I think the thing about the fitness industry is that the way it markets itself is that if you eat a certain way, if you train a certain way, if you follow these rules, these guidelines, then at some point you will reach a desired outcome. Mm-hmm. So really, how you get to that outcome is less important than just getting there. And so what tends to happen is people begin to sacrifice other things that are important to just get to that goal. And it becomes completely goal-oriented, completely outcome-led. And when you focus primarily on an outcome, then you do have to sacrifice how you get there. So the journey is less important than the destination. Mm-hmm. Whereas intuitive eating, and certainly if you look, I mean, even dietetics departments of hospitals, they are more focused on behavior change and positive daily small changes than outcomes, because it's more important that you kind of embody a sense of wellness along the way, and that you actually focus more on the journey of learning how to make sustainable, realistic changes, rather than saying, I don't care how I get there, I just want this body, and I just I'm going to get there, and it doesn't matter how. And I don't care if I'm starving. I don't care if it's painful. I just want that body. Right. And it's a very different perspective. You know, one is process oriented and one is goal oriented. Mm-hmm. And I think for us as people working with humans who are obviously looking for something, they come to us with a need, don't they? I mean, you know, you don't pay a PT, you don't pay a therapist unless you have a need and you think they can help you meet it. I think for us, it's really important that we kind of unpack, okay, is this goal something that you will ever reach? Mm-hmm. Is this a place that you are likely to ever get to? Because ethically, if anyone is going to a coach or a trainer or a nutritionist or a dietitian and they say, I want to be this size, I want to be this shape, and they're coming from a place that is completely unrealistic, it's just not ethical to say you can do it. And that's why I find an awful lot of the fitness and nutrition world just dangerously unethical, really. Sorry, I've gone off the beaten track a bit because we were talking about how people value themselves, but
no, these are important things because, like you mentioned, people usually come to me, come to maybe a PT or a trainer or a fitness coach, and they have a body in mind, right, or a certain percentage of fat in mind, certain figure, and they come with this picture, like I want to be like that person or look like that person, so make me or help me become or sculpt that body. So
yeah,
and as you said, it's ethical to say maybe no to them, like this is not realistic, this is not right for you, because I mean we have certain genetics and there are differences in gender, differences based on our age, and I think we can to a certain extent shape our bodies, but I know that my body will never look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, whatever I do, right? So
yeah.
What are actually some things I would say that we can influence regarding our body composition? I think this is, how would I frame it in a different way? So there comes a person, I want to lose this kind of fat. How can we tell them what is realistic for that person?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most important conversation I would have thought for anyone, who's having, the way that I don't work as a PT anymore, but I would have thought the way that I do my consulting, so from the discovery call through to the initial consultation, through to kind of all of the follow-up conversations that I have with clients. Right. It's that initial consultation that, we just kind of find out actually about each other. And I find out what my client wants, and my client finds out a little bit about the way I communicate, my kind of questioning style, I guess, how I respond to them, the pace of my voice, and we build rapport. So it's not even until probably the second time I speak to my client that we really get down into the nitty gritty of, okay, what is it that you want out of me? What is it that you're looking for? And so when I ask that question, if someone was to say to me something that I thought was completely unrealistic, I would probably ask them what they think they need to do to get there. And I would try and understand what their knowledge base is, what their ideas are, before I even talk about what I think is realistic for them. Because often what you find is that people have Google at their fingertips, and you can ask Google literally anything, And so people come with what they think are fully formed ideas about nutrition and fitness. And so they are their own armchair experts. And sometimes what they're looking for is for you to just agree with them. But actually, a lot of the time, as you are probably aware, people's ideas about what they need to do to get to a certain point are based on pseudoscience. They're based on populist ideas that aren't achievable. And so I think it's just really good to find out, well, what is your client's knowledge base to begin with? Because what you might have to do is, from a very basic position, you might have to sort of dispel a few myths. You might have to unpack, like the ketogenic diet. You might have to unpack clean eating. You might have to unpack, carbohydrate substrate metabolism in the body. It just depends on where that person is coming from. But if I wanted to say to a client, look, you know what you want is not going to happen, I would probably say to them, realistically, if they wanted to get to that point, what would realistically have to happen? And if that would mean the pain of an 18-month, cyclical training, cutting, and I would outline for them realistically just how painful that process is. And then I would throw in the fact that my client might have a job and what that will do to their cognitive function. I would throw in the fact that they still have to tidy their house. They might have to look after kids, what that's going to do to their sex drive. And when you start to lay out realistically what it takes to get the kind of magazine-ready body that they might be looking for, very quickly you'll see their faces change. And at that point, they've got a decision to make, haven't they? Are they going to stay with you and focus on realistic goals that you then outline for them? Or are they going to decide that you're not the trainer for them and they go find somebody that is prepared to give them this, completely unattainable plan? And I think that's hard, because then trainers are basically facing the fact that some clients they're going to lose. But I think that's dependent upon your personal values and morals about your own practice, really. So yeah, that's what I would do. I don't know if that's something similar to what you would do, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of actual thing for me right now, because I've been working also mostly with women, and often they just have some body image issues, right? And I see that, like you mentioned, having this intake or starting conversations in the beginning are very important to find out, like, not only about the goals, but why does the person want to have these goals? What is it that they perceive that, okay, I will get that body, what will that mean for me? Like, does it mean that I will be healthy? Is it like that I'm chasing the health? Is it that I'm chasing the self-worth? What is it that this new body will allow me to get? So that's an important conversation. And just like you mentioned, I think the most powerful thing that we have in our hands when working with people is that maybe they come with this distorted picture. They think that they want something, and over the period of first few sessions, you can assist these people to understand that, well, actually, it's not the body fat that I want, it's the self-worth or self-love.
Yeah.
And you can help them achieve that without achieving the body.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because one of the biggest things that I hear friends say, and just throughout my own personal life, is the whole, okay, well, I've got an event coming up, and it might be a holiday or a wedding or a party, but I really need to be thin for it. And it's like, people have this idea that they can't have fun on holiday unless they have a smaller body.
Mm-hmm.
And I just find that it's kind of heartbreaking, really, because it's like they don't want to share their holiday photos. And when you look through photos, the comments are, oh my God, look at my, butt, stomach, legs, whatever. Oh, don't I look awful? Don't I look fat? Oh, it's such a shame because I could have, I really splurged. Or, and then if they diet before they go on holiday and they spend the whole holiday binging because they psychologically feel like they're coming from a place of restriction.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a whole different way of approaching that. And I think it's where you're coming from as a person. If you're coming from a place of loathing yourself and of thinking that you're not enough, and that to achieve self-esteem and self-worth, you have to take more away, is a very different mindset than saying, actually, everything I have right now, everything I am right now is enough. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in, and, I'm going to look at diet quality. I'm going to look at why am I exercising? And do I even like the exercise I'm doing? And is having a different sized body going to mean that I get a better job or I have a better relationship? And I think what you've said is so important. The why is so important, because I think when you deep dive on that why, I think for a lot of people, it does come back to where are you coming from? Do you loathe yourself or do you love yourself? Because those start points are kind of what determines success, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So actually, why not take it some time, and to anybody who is listening, we can maybe brainstorm some questions regarding the why. So here is what I use, for example, with my clients. So why do you want to achieve that body or your goal, right? That would be the question number one. What would be the outcome of achieving that goal? Would it make you feel better about yourself? Would it help you get your job? Do you think that maybe, like you mentioned, you were a trainer and it was your branding by your body? So maybe you think that by having this body type, it will help you get more clients, maybe love or something like that. So what is it? Or why do you want to achieve that body? And is it something that you can do, or is it achievable for you, and can you sustain it? So, and if you can sustain it, is it worth it? So maybe, you can get to that, let's say, body fat percentage, or to this figure that you want, but how much effort, energy do you need to put in to sustain it and maintain it?
Yeah, that sustainability is really important. And that's why you just, you see quite frequently people who are on a diet, when something else, happens to them that kind of trumps importance, they let the diet go, because dieting, it involves so much of our executive function in our brain. And, you really do have to expend a lot of mental energy to try and sidestep the physiological drivers of appetite, to kind of exist in a world that is primed with food cues as well, through every screen, through every street that we walk down in a town or a city, there's fast food. So to sustain dietary restriction and adhere to a plan in an environment that is really, designed to have you consume food a lot, and rich foods as well, energy dense, nutrient deficient foods. It just takes so much mental energy, and the brain uses, 25% of the body's total energy. And if you're not taking in a lot of energy, then the brain is actually, starved of energy, and you're trying to sustain a dietary restrictive, a dietary restriction when you aren't able to really, because you're having to use willpower, and all willpower is energy. It's actual energy.
Yeah.
And so when something happens to somebody's life, like let's say, think of a number of scenarios. Somebody meets someone and they get, really happy, involved in a new relationship. You see people go, oh, I can't be bothered to diet anymore because I'm just happy now. And you think, oh, right, okay. And then somebody gets sick. So it's like, I can't diet because somebody I love is really unwell. And actually what they're saying is, the dieting takes up a lot of my time and energy. And now something more important has come along. I can't do it. And that's why when people come to me and they are in the depths of an eating disorder, or they have some really chronically disordered eating behaviors, I have to be really clear and direct about recovery being almost a full-time job, because to come away from that disordered mindset, it really takes so much effort to relearn how to eat and how to think about yourself, that really recovery has to take priority in as much as the diet took priority. But, something else that came to my mind as well, and I do talk a lot, so you can interject at any point, Daniel, because I know I like go off on these monologues. And I forget that I'm waffling on.
Don't worry.
But something else that came to my mind is that, I often think that people who go to trainers or fitness coaches or PTs or nutritionists, many of those people I would classify as the worried well. And by that, I mean, these are usually people who have disposable income to pay privately for complementary healthcare. And that's what I think fitness trainers are. They're complementary healthcare. They're people who are helping you achieve better health. And, so these are people who have got disposable income. They're people who have probably already got a reasonable grasp on healthy eating. They're already prioritizing physical activity in their life, because otherwise they wouldn't be coming to you. And so really the kinds of people that PTs, that trainers, that coaches are going to be helping, they're already on some kind of path to well-being. And often it's just helping people kind of unlearn some really, unhelpful thoughts and unhelpful, and often not based on any science, facts, and then kind of bringing them round to sustainable practice. But for me, the people that really need guidance and support are the people that are not going to even contact you. They're the people that are going to have so many barriers before they even pick up the phone. They're the people that really need help. And I think one of the barriers is changing the face of what a fit body looks like, because a person in a much larger body who is quite sedentary, who does feel bad about themselves, who is facing a lot of stigma because they might have other health conditions. So there's a lot of healthism, a lot of morality to do with health and fitness that they're obviously having to face. If they have this picture in mind of a fit body that is like a million miles away from where they are, they're not going to feel like they can even access your service. They're going to feel like, well, I don't go to a PT because look at the state of me. And so I think those are the people that are really worth looking for in a way, and kind of trying to find a way to build bridges to help them. Daniel, I'm really sorry. I've got to open my front door because the postman's just arrived. Sorry about that. So I guess my point is really that the people that come to us, the people that find us, they're already part of the way there. Right. But I think where our work is really important and much, much harder is how we don't feed into the idea that health and fitness is thinness. And how do we make our services more inclusive to the people that aren't represented in the kind of nutrition and fitness world? Those people who do have much larger bodies, that might be in wheelchairs, that might have to use mobility aids, that might have existing health conditions. Because I imagine that a lot of your clients are already in reasonably, quote unquote, normal bodies, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So. And that's the thing, the people that want to talk to me about nutrition, they're the people that are already, they think they know enough already. All they want to do is have me confirm to them that what they're doing is right. It's the people that don't want to talk about their food, that don't want to have those conversations, that are existing on 30% saturated fat, that have type 2 diabetes, that are in larger bodies, that are completely overwhelmed. And so they don't feel like they can make enough changes that are going to make any difference. So rather than make one tiny change, they make no changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where our work is very difficult, but very, very valuable.
Right. I think that what you were referring to is also, I can relate it to the hierarchy of needs. So basically, when you have you were speaking about these people who already are interested in nutrition and so on. So basically, they already have some base level of satisfaction. They have their basic needs covered, and now they can focus on some of these higher needs. So that would be my takeaway from this.
Yeah, I think so. And it's often, it's often people that are maybe eating in a way that they, and I think coming back to the why question as well, because plant-based diets are so popular at the moment that I think people often have, they've taken a dietary principle that might be rooted in reasonable science, but rather than do it moderately, they do something to the nth degree, so rather than have a plant-based diet, they have a plant-only diet.
Okay.
And then wonder why maybe they don't feel good on it, because they aren't necessarily meeting all of their basic nutritional needs.
Or just not eating enough.
Sorry?
Or just not eating enough, because I don't know if you noticed before, but usually I work mostly with plant-based people, like vegans.
Oh, right. No, I didn't notice.
Okay. And I have been vegan, or mostly vegan myself, for now it's 6th year.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, in this area, the most important thing, or the most prevalent thing, is just people don't eat enough, because, if you eat these foods that they perceive to be healthy, what comes to your mind at first if you don't have any kind of nutritional background, or these things? You see, okay, it's broccoli, it's salad, it's vegetables, so that's all that I will eat. It's vegetables, big salads.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, this doesn't give you energy, right? It's good for micronutrients, it's good for vitamins, minerals, but yeah, it lacks energy. So go on. I think we have some good ideas going on.
Yeah, I think plant-based diets are great, and I sort of completely invest in the idea of a plant-based diet. But like you say, I think something I see vegans, the vegan friends that I have, and I'm thinking of a couple of clients as well, is that they start to rely really heavily on starches and nut butters, because it's quick. Because the thing about a vegan diet is that I think what's great about it actually is that you have to be quite creative, and you have to really invest in your diet in a way that means you're connected to the food. You have to think about the way that flavors work. You have to think quite creatively about how you're going to make a meal that's palatable, that's, tasty. And for me, that's brilliant because it gets us back to the kitchen. It gets us back thinking about cooking and cooking from scratch too, which I love cooking. I just think it's one of those skills that, families really need to get back to, like the family table and eating together and sharing conversations. So I think culturally, totally. It's really, really important. Yeah. But the other thing about having a vegan diet, and I had a period in my life where I was vegan for quite a few years and loved it. But for me, I just found that there was no convenience food anymore, that the convenience food really was based on starch and nut butters. And so I had to or protein bars that were vegan. So I had to really think about how I was going to eat on the go. And I think that's what makes it's a challenge, but I think that actually ends up being, strangely, a real positive of the diet, because you can't just eat on the hop with it, can you? You really have to think about planning your food and making sure that you've got skills in the kitchen, which is great.
Right. It has its place. So, going from there on, I think we can move on to the topic that you have mentioned already, and that is intuitive eating. So can you talk more about what it actually is, intuitive eating, and maybe who is it good for? What kind of goals can we pursue with intuitive eating?
Yeah, okay. So
what is it? What is intuitive eating? What do we understand?
Okay. So one of the things that people say to me when I talk about intuitive eating is, and actually it was literally yesterday, this is what my mum said to me. She was like, so intuitive eating, does that basically mean you can just eat what you want whenever you want, right? Because if I did that, I would be really, really big.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest misconception about intuitive eating. So it's not like permission to, and this, so
to eat whatever and whenever. Yes, because I think what you are referring to is that intuitive eating should be based on probably the whole foods, and that intuitive eating might not work. Like you said, I eat whatever I want, whenever I want. If I'm used to eating chocolates and highly processed foods, and this is what my body now asks for.
Yeah.
Is all hamburgers and pizza and highly processed foods. So this is how I feel like eating. So I will continue eating that.
But often I think the question, the reason that question comes up is because we are all conditioned to see foods as having some kind of value. So we see good foods and bad foods. We see fat foods and skinny foods. We see healthy foods, unhealthy foods. And so some people tell themselves, well, I can't eat that because that's a bad food. But when I've been good, I can reward myself with it. And so in there, you've got morality, you've got value. So when people say to me, oh my God, if I ate what I wanted, I would just literally eat chocolate and ice cream all day long. But then I say back to them, actually, would you? Because if I said to you, all you could eat was chocolate and ice cream, how long do you think it would take for you to get bored?
Great point.
Because, we have in our minds the idea that if we could eat, if all foods had no caloric value, if all foods were equal, we have in our minds that we would choose burgers, pizza, cake, gâteau, ice cream, cream, all of this stuff. But actually, we probably wouldn't, because we all have an evolutionary drive to stay alive. And actually, we all have biological cues to seek the nutrients that we need. It's why, a dog that has a bad stomach will eat grass. It's why certain animals will seek out a particular plant to eat because they have an ailment. We were born with this primal evolutionary mechanism, and yet because we are conditioned to look at food as good and bad, healthy, unhealthy, and so on and so forth, we lose that basic biological survival mechanism. We're completely disconnected from what we actually want to eat because we have this idea that some foods are bad and some foods are good. And so what intuitive eating is, quite a long way to get to it, but I'm finally there, is it's just a framework for thinking about food differently. And it's a framework that brings in cultural preferences of taste, of palate. It can be adapted to any individual. And it has 10 principles, and you work through the principles and not necessarily in chronological order, because some principles are more relevant to some people, whereas others are not. But you kind of work through these principles in a way that allows you to start feeling that you can trust your body a bit more, and that actually you can eat in a way that is sustainable. And you can start to choose foods that you actually really want to eat rather than foods that you think you should eat. And it also unpacks ideas of, well, what does healthy actually mean? And what can healthy actually look like? And it looks at health as a continuum rather than an outcome. So, your health, for example, and my health are going to look very different, but actually your version of healthy is good for you and my version of healthy is good for me. But they can be two completely different positions. So it's not really about getting to an outcome. It's more about saying to somebody, let's get you feeling good about your body. Let's get you eating in a way that you can do for the rest of your life. Let's uncouple the idea of body size from health. And yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing that intuitive eating doesn't really take into account is poverty. So it assumes that you have an abundance of food. And so it doesn't really work for somebody who is really struggling with money, because obviously that's a completely separate and often much more grave situation. If somebody cannot afford to eat well, then that's something else that needs to be addressed completely separately from intuitive eating.
Yeah, but I think this is the kind of people who would not even come into touch with anything like, or they would not be interested in like topics like what is intuitive eating and so on, because they don't have their basic needs covered in the first place.
Yeah, that's it. It's about, basic needs. It's about, are you safe? Have you got a house?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to intuitive eating, so you said that there are some principles to follow. So can we mention a few of them?
Yeah. So the first principle, the principle number one, is called reject the diet mentality. And that first principle is the hardest principle, I think, because it means you have to start to identify what dieting has taken away from your life and how dieting has interrupted just living your life. So say, for example, what has it done to your relationships? Has it meant that you can't enjoy social occasions? Have you had less enjoyable times on holiday? Has it interrupted intimacy? Has it meant that you haven't want to go for a job? Does it mean that you're constantly thinking about food all the time? And when you ask somebody to really think about what dieting has done and what it's taken away, then you can start to say, okay, well, how do we move away from that? How do we get you away from that restrictive mindset? And that means you have to start looking at diet culture, and you have to start really identifying, well, where is that dieting message coming from? And that might come from a really early age. That might come from your mum or your sisters or your dad. It might come from somebody saying something to you at school when you're 9. That comes from every shop that you go in, because, if you're in a larger body, maybe you are not represented in fashion. Mm-hmm. That might come from a magazine. It comes from the internet. It comes from everywhere. And when you start to notice diet culture, it's almost like, that scene in The Matrix. Have you seen The Matrix?
Yeah, definitely.
So the scene with the red pill and the blue pill?
Mm-hmm.
And so Morpheus is saying to Neo, if you take the blue pill, you go right back to sleep. Nothing changes. You go back to what you know. And if you take the red pill, I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Well, when I'm with clients and I'm talking to them about diet culture, I often show them that clip and I say to them, I'm Morpheus, you're Neo, and the Matrix is diet culture. Because once you see it, it can't be unseen. Because you start to be able to identify narratives of, oh, well, thin is healthy. Oh, well, attractive is thin. Oh, well, feminine is pink. Oh, well, let's talk about, strong is the new sexy. Well, that means I need to be strong. And you start to notice all of these pervasive narratives that run through everything. I mean, nothing is free from this narrative of the thin ideal. And so rejecting the diet mentality, it can take quite a long time, because depending on my client's capacity to be able to go deeply into kind of sociology and psychology and language, you can go as deep as you want to with this. Mm-hmm. But once you see it, you will never again be free of noticing how diet culture really gets in and fucks you up, basically. So that's principle 1. But then you kind of end up going through, many of the principles really stick out to me as being kind of almost non-negotiable. Like, mm-hmm. Making peace with food is a principle that I pretty much always have to address. And making peace with food is then about looking at food and making sure that all food is viewed as equal, and that you start to really understand a little bit about how different food has different values based purely on whether or not you like it, and how you can choose to eat whatever you want. And actually, once you start to make peace with food and you take away a lot of the fear around food, mm-hmm. you can begin to feel comfortable around all foods. And so nothing presents you with any issue. And if it does, it's purely because you just don't like the taste of it, or you just don't like to eat animals, or you're allergic to it, for example. But making peace with food is really, really important, because for a lot of people, some foods are loaded with fear. Like, for example, if somebody comes to me and they are clean eating and they're like, well, anything processed, I don't touch. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For them, going out to eat is an absolute nightmare, because they are constantly looking at, oh, well, how much saturated fat has that got? And, oh, is that, a hyper processed meal? And, oh, I can't eat gluten, because they believe that that's kind of a processed food, because they don't understand that it is just a protein. so you have to sort of unpack all of these values and beliefs that people have around food and just completely level the playing field before you even begin. And so that's principle 3. And I guess a really quite unique principle of intuitive eating is challenge the food police, which is really where it begins to bring in principles of like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because challenge the food police is about challenging both your external environment and your internal thoughts. And for example, if you go to eat something or if a person goes to eat something and immediately they're looking at whatever it is they're going to eat. Let's say, for example, pizza. Maybe you're guessing that pizza is my favorite food, and you'd be right. But they go to eat pizza and they're like immediately flooded with thoughts of, I can't have this pizza because I'm too big. And if I eat this pizza, I'm going to gain loads of weight. And this pizza is going to be so tasty, I'm not going to be able to control myself. I'm going to end up eating this pizza and then someone else's pizza. And so what that is in terms of intuitive eating, that is an internal thought. That is a thought that is conditioned, and it's not necessarily generated from a place of fact. It's generated from a place of fear and of myth. And we use this principle, challenge the food police, as a way of addressing, okay, is this really going to be the outcome? Is this really what's going to happen if you eat this food? And there's a really lovely worksheet, which is called like the power of 3. And so clients have to come up with alternative scenarios or alternative outcomes based on that thought. So if the thought is, if I eat this, I'm going to get fat, maybe you could prompt them into saying, well, if I eat this, maybe I'm going to be, maybe it's going to feel really good and I'm actually going to feel really nourished. Maybe I'm going to enjoy eating this pizza. And so what you're encouraging them to do is interrupt that automatic thought and replace it with another thought so that the thought changes and then subsequently after time, the behavior changes. And so that's what you would do to challenge internal food police. External food police, so literally it's going to be comments from others or environments that can be quite triggering for somebody. So maybe like one that comes up all the time is like work or college, because somebody might be going into work and the chat around the lunch table is, oh my God, I feel so fat. I can't have that lasagna today. I'm going to have to just stick with salad. But for somebody who's trying to move away from the diet mentality, for them, that's reinforcing diet mentality. And so really it's about looking at, okay, what do you do in that situation? How do you challenge the food police in that situation? Do you challenge it? Or do you say, actually, this is not a safe space for me right now. I'm going to extrapolate myself from this situation and I'm going to go somewhere where I can just be at peace, eat comfortably. And then when I've developed a more kind of solid framework of boundaries, when I've got more resilience, when I'm really practicing intuitive eating and I've developed mastery, then I can go back into that environment and I can challenge the food police. Maybe I don't challenge the food police. Maybe I just let it go. But either way, the food police is kind of this metaphorical phrase for anything that undermines your efficacy of intuitive eating. So like questioning, judgment, undermining your body trust, reinforcing the thin ideal, all of that stuff. So, I mean, those are 3 really significant principles of intuitive eating, which make it very different to a meal plan or any other sort of specific outcome-led diet.
Yeah. So, for example, regarding the challenging external food police, I think an example of that would be for a person who feels like that they are having trouble with that they are maybe having a bad relationship with food, that they are fearful of some foods, and that's coming mostly from maybe social media. It might be wise and healthy for them to unfollow maybe some, I don't know, social media or influencers that they have been following, or fitness enthusiasts or fitness websites, and just give themselves a break from that. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's certainly for some of my younger clients a really, really important thing to address, because there are a lot of influencers who really are just peddling some crackpot ideas about health and fitness. And there are some social influencers like Megan Jane Crabb, whose handle is Body Posy Panda on Instagram. She's a young woman. She's in her early 20s. And she is just trailblazing for body positivity. And, if what you look at, you seek, because we all have confirmation bias, don't we? We all like to immerse ourselves in a world that, reinforces our own personal values and beliefs. But if you're constantly looking at images of thin bodies and you don't inhabit a thin body, how are you going to find your place in the world? It's just not possible. So you need to look at things that are more inclusive, that are using positive language, and that, to be honest with you, are just realistic. Like, most women are not walking around with body fat levels of 20%, even 20%. 20% is college athlete level fitness. It's that we're talking university level rower. And even these figures, when you say to people 20% body fat for most menstruating women is not sustainable, most women will be like, oh my God, I thought I should have been aiming for like 15%. And it's actually looking at, hang on a minute.
15% body fat on women, they really looked ripped. It's not like with male.
Yeah, exactly. But, often people's ideas about these figures, these numbers, and, what it takes to get there, it's just completely warped.
Yeah. So
yeah, but I think social media can actually be a place of good. I think if you're looking at the right stuff, I think it can be a place of positivity, but you've got to look for it. You've got to really try hard to find your tribe, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good exercise to make, like to do a little revision of who you are following, what kind of websites you are following, and choose consciously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it depends on what you're looking for as well, because some of the people I follow, I wouldn't necessarily recommend to my clients. I like to follow quite nutrition science heavy podcasts.
Yeah.
Which I think are probably not necessarily relevant for the majority of people unless they were actually working in an applied sense or academic. I really like podcasts for my clients that are kind of rooted in the everyday application of some basic principles, because I think sometimes knowing more can undermine your well-being, because you start to try and fine-tune things that are not necessarily important. Because if you're missing the basics of well-being, if you're missing basic sleep, if you're missing basic energy needs, if you're missing basic physical activity levels, if you're missing basic stress strategies, worrying about something like gluten or whether or not you're in a ketogenic state, or worrying about time restricted feeding, or whether or not you've eaten protein around your workout. I mean, honestly, like, get the basics straight first, rather than worrying about all that.
This is a very important point that you just brought, and I am a strong believer in working on the basics time and time again, and it's just mastering the basics, even for people who are like professionals, because just like you said, we can easily fall into the rabbit hole that okay, we can speak, for example, like we have carbohydrates, right? Now we go into carbohydrates metabolism, carbohydrate timing, carbohydrate cycling, and so on, deeper and deeper. And, then we just forget to get to the basic, like what is your overall carbohydrate intake, what is your overall energy intake in that sense. So it's always good to look back at the basics and really focus on that from my perspective, from my point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree. And for me, one of the basics, which isn't often mentioned, is play, because I think a lot of people look at health and fitness, particularly like armchair athletes who love to train and they get a lot out of it and their identity is all tied up with fitness. I think those people forget that, every mammal on the planet plays. Like, this is how we communicate. If you look at lions on the savannah, they're rolling around, they're joking with each other. If you look at, monkeys, they're running around pulling each other's tails. It's part of being alive, is play and joy. And I think sometimes people get so tied up in, I've got to do things right. They become quite tied up in perfectionism of, I've got to eat right, I've got to move right, I've got to prioritize my sleep, that they start to sacrifice basic play. They miss social events because they got to go train. They don't hang out with friends because they got to go train. They don't go out to eat because I'm on a meal plan. And actually, if you've got sleep and stress, well, I think play is really a way to address stress anyway. But if you've got sleep and food sorted and physical activity sorted, but you're not finding space for joy and play and being creative, I think that's another aspect of the human condition, that it can really leave you feeling quite depressed and anxious and flat, because if you don't find joy and play in your life, then honestly, what's the point? I'm just throwing out there.
I think the way how you speak relates to people who are more like, I would say, or I would call it spiritual. And, on the other side, we have people who are more like A-type personalities, right? Getting things done and being very planned and goal-oriented. So so regarding the play, what you were just mentioning or you were talking about, is like, when I think about it, and I would just put the same concept in other words, would be like, okay, we have a person who has like their training schedule, they want to work out hard, they have their job and so on. For them, look, if you do that, maybe you do your training, you work out hard, in between you are probably or maybe sedentary person, and when we compare that to being like playful, having a play in your life, what is play or playing? It involves movement, and it involves like mental benefits or stress relief, anxiety relief, and so on. I would hypothesize that people who play, or when we look just at children, right? Children don't go out to train. They hang out on trees. They climb the trees. They are moving. And they are probably expending much more energy than you at the workout. And they are getting stronger. Exactly. And they are much happier than a person who goes to gym 5 times, 6 times a week, work out hard, and do bicep curls.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and I think I completely agree. And we kind of lose, we become disconnected from our natural drive to swing and to jump and to hop and to skip and to dance. And I think that's really, really sad. And I think that a lot of people who go to the gym, that maybe is their play. Like, they love it and they feel really good and they get all the endorphin rush. And and that's wonderful. But you know, what I like to do with my clients is I like to, and this is kind of tied up with identity, right?
Well, challenge your internal police.
Yeah, like challenge their internal police, but also ask them to make a list of like, what brings you joy? You know, why are you alive? What do you like to do? You know, if you had your perfect day, what would it look like? And where is the joy coming from? Because joy is such an antidote to mental health stuff. You know, if you feel like you're connected and there's a reason for your being, then, you know, you're less likely to want to not be around. You're less likely to want to isolate yourself. You're less likely to want to feel like you want to hurt yourself. And often when you ask people what brings you joy, people go, oh, God, let me think. But that's the thing that should literally fly off your tongue. That's the thing that you should know if you're an adult. What makes you happy? I mean, these are basic things, right? But often people are so convinced that happiness is tied up with a body, happiness is tied up with a relationship, with a job, that they don't actually remember what they laugh about anymore. And I think for me, I mean, we're moving away from kind of food and eating, but that for me is really significant, just to kind of bring it back round to body image. It's really, really significant because you're asking people to think about the reason they're alive and move away from their reason for being as an object to be looked at to a human being to experience rather than just kind of be observed.
Definitely. And I don't think even that we moved away from it, because we are just talking about these things just from a different perspective, from a different view. People who are successful athletes, who are really, I would say, fulfilled successful athletes, people who are successful in what they do, who can sustain these things long term, be healthy long term, is people who love what they are doing. And it's like we can have an endurance athlete who is a professional, let's say, marathoner. It doesn't mean that they run all year long, you know. Maybe in winter they love skiing. They just love to move, you know, and they are intuitive in that way and playful.
So exactly.
So that's exactly it. And to wrap things up, I think that when it comes also to intuitive eating and having this intuition, it's like something that some people have like expectation. They want to lose weight, for example, gain weight, gain muscle. They have this misconception or preconceived notion that okay, I need some kind of meal plan or stick to some numbers like calorie counting and these kind of things. And intuitive eating takes that away. It's like not very structured. It's more like vague, and probably also takes much more time to develop to be successful intuitive eater. And that can be scary for people, because just like you mentioned before during this episode, that people who go into the diets, they look for kind of control. So intuitive eating might feel like you are taking away that control, that they can feel that they are not in control, but actually the opposite is or can be true.
Yeah, I think you're right there, and I think for some personalities, you know, particularly Type A people that enjoy structure, intuitive eating can feel a little bit scary, and I think there are times when intuitive eating maybe isn't appropriate too, and
right.
you know, for some people, you know, particularly people who have got to follow a very specific meal plan for medical reasons, I mean, they're just not going to be able to eat intuitively. But I think some of those principles can still be applied, certainly. And I think...
So, yeah, for example, now it came to my mind, sorry to interrupt you.
That's okay.
So, some of these principles that could be implied, for example, we have a person who is like on some medical, with some medical issue, maybe they have to follow some specific diet, right? So like gluten-free or whatever. I think that they can be still intuitive, and as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the principles of intuitive eating is like being mindful, right? So I think this is something that can be practiced with anything and with everything.
Yeah, I mean, if you have celiac disease, I mean, you can eat intuitively without a shadow of a doubt, and certainly mindfulness is a theme that runs through several of the principles. But I was more thinking, I mean, I guess, so I do some volunteer work for my local hospital, and I do some nutrition talks for their cancer recovery days. So they put on these events for people who have been diagnosed with cancer or are living with cancer.
Okay.
And so as part of that, I have to incorporate approaches to nutrition that take into account, some people might have feeding tubes, and some people might have issues with taste, issues with swallowing. And so I guess when I say a medical diet, what I'm looking at really is, you know, quite serious situations whereby somebody, you know, for example, with chemotherapy, you experience quite a lot of nausea. You can have a lot of gastric distress. You lose your appetite. And so in cases like that, often you have to override feelings that you don't want to eat, because if you don't eat, you're going to lose weight and you're going to end up cachectic, or, you know, you're going to start going into catabolism, which is a real risk for people who are experiencing cancer treatment. And so intuitive eating in that circumstance, that's not appropriate, because you just need to get nutrition in, and often not nutrition, energy, just get energy in. And if that means you're drinking like butter, then get it in, you know?
Yeah, that's a very different thing.
Yeah, it's very different, but you know, it's also it's a quite common scenario, because, you know, 1 in 3 of us are going to experience a cancer diagnosis, and knowing what to say to somebody who is going through that treatment and might have an interruption in their ability to eat is really important. And certainly body image for somebody who's going through a cancer diagnosis or living with cancer is a really significant part of it, because they lose body trust. They might have scarring. They might have residual complications from the treatment, which leaves them in pain. And so that, I think, is really important to kind of bring in. But unless you have something really significant medically going on with you, there's no reason why you cannot eat intuitively. The only barrier to intuitive eating really in that case is that the person is moderating their emotion through controlling their diet. And they perceive that a loss of control is a loss of emotional regulation. And I mean, in that case, there is a principle for that, which is principle 7. It's cope with your feelings without using food. But that often is something that is a real challenge, because some people only feel safe when they're exercising complete control over their diet. And that might be something that goes on for the whole of somebody's life. And I think if somebody wants to address that and they've recognized this is not making me happy, then they can address it through intuitive eating counselling, or help with other counselling or psychotherapy or psychology or whatever. But some people don't want to address it. They just are they are happy with moderating their feelings through food. And let me tell you, it's no different for somebody who's moderating their feelings through gambling, or moderating their feelings through shopping, or moderating their feelings through alcoholism. or drug abuse. These are still ways that people create distance from emotion by focusing on something else. And so really, I don't exercise any judgment over those choices. That's just another strategy for people to cope with emotion. But if and when somebody was to come to me and say, I've got this strategy, it's no longer helping me, it's actually hurting me, but I don't know if there's another way of me dealing with this, then I can say, well, yeah, there are hundreds of ways you can deal with your emotions, and it doesn't have to be through food.
Yeah, and I think this is a nice wrap up for this conversation that we have been having, and I really enjoyed and I appreciated your time, Simone, and your experience and knowledge that you shared with us today. So actually, I think that I feel like we could go forever talking about this. Unfortunately, we don't have forever. And what's the best way? Where can people follow you? Where can people get in touch with you if they are looking maybe for counseling regarding intuitive eating or nutrition advice?
So people can find me through the intuitiveeating.org counselor directory, or they can find me through simoneharding.co.uk, which is my website. I'm really quite active on Twitter, Simone J. Harding, and I have a Facebook page, which is Simone Harding Nutrition, which I kind of periodically use, but I'm not really on it massive amounts. And I have did I mention Instagram? So I mean, I'm easily findable, but probably through my website is the easiest way to contact me.
Well, I'll make sure to put it in the show notes, links to all these social media that you use and to your website, of course.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me as a guest on your podcast. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Daniel.
Well, thank you very much. I hope to see you. If you like the podcast and you haven't done so already, please consider leaving a rating and a review online. And similarly, if you could share news about this podcast, I will be really glad and thankful. I mean, it would be great. And thank you for all of you who continue to do that.